The morning I turned 68, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table in my son's house, and listened to the sounds of a family that had quietly stopped including me. There was a time I thought living here would be good for all of us. My son, Thomas, had suggested it himself, 2 years after Walter died. "Mom, the house is too big for just you," he said over the phone, and I could hear his wife, Renee, in the background. Her voice soft and encouraging. "We have the room. We'd love to have you." I believed them. I sold my home in Tucson, the house Walter and I had lived in for 31 years, and I moved to Portland with 3 suitcases, a box of books, and the quiet hope that family meant something lasting. For a while, it did. I cooked Sunday dinners. I helped with the grocery runs. When their daughter, my granddaughter Cassie, was struggling in her 2nd year of college, I sat with her at that same kitchen table for 3 evenings in a row, working through her economics assignments until she finally understood. She hugged me and said, "Grandma, you're literally the smartest person I know." I held on to that for a long time. But something shifts in a house when one person inside it begins to feel like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice weather changing not in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small things that shouldn't matter but somehow do. It started with the thermostat. Renee liked the house cold. I've always run cold, the way older bodies do, and I'd turn the hallway thermostat up a few degrees in the evening. One week I noticed a small lock had appeared on the thermostat panel. Not a word was said to me about it. Just a lock, and a temperature I hadn't agreed to. Then there was the matter of the car. I had my own car, a reliable silver Honda I'd driven for 9 years. Thomas asked if I could park it on the street for a few weeks because Renee's sister was visiting and needed the garage space. Renee's sister visited for 4 days. My car stayed on the street for 7 months. When I mentioned it one morning at breakfast, Thomas looked up from his phone and said, "It's not a big deal, Mom. The street is fine." He went back to scrolling. Renee poured herself coffee and didn't look at me at all. I stopped mentioning things after that. I am not a woman who requires much. Walter used to tease me about that. Ruth. He'd say that was his name for me. Never Eleanor, always Ruth. Because my middle name was Ruth, and he said it suited me better. Ruth, you could be happy with a good book and a window. He wasn't wrong. I don't need noise or celebration. I need to feel like I am still a person in the room I'm sitting in, not a piece of furniture that has outlasted its purpose. By the time winter came around again, I had learned to stay in my room by 8 o'clock each evening, not because anyone told me to, but because the living room felt like a place I was interrupting. Thomas and Renee watched their shows, and when I sat with them, there was a particular silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of people waiting for you to leave. I got good at reading it. Cassie came home on a Friday evening in March, and I heard her before I saw her, that bright, rushing energy she's had since she was small. She dropped her bag in the entryway and came straight to find me, which was rare enough that I noticed. She knocked on my bedroom door even though it was open, leaned against the frame, and smiled the smile I recognized from when she wanted something. "Grandma, you busy?" I was reading. I set the book down. "Never too busy for you." She came in and sat at the foot of my bed, and she talked for a while about school, about her roommate, about a professor she found pretentious. I let her talk. I've learned that people who want something will always circle around it first. Finally, she said, "So, I found this apartment. It's perfect, honestly. 2 bedrooms, close to campus, really good price." "That sounds nice," I said. "The thing is," she said, "the property management company wants a cosigner. Because I don't have enough income yet, technically. My part-time job doesn't quite meet their threshold." She looked at me with those large, careful eyes. "Mom and Dad said they couldn't do it because of the mortgage refinance they're in the middle of. And I thought you have good credit, right, Grandma?" I looked at her for a moment. She was 20 years old. She was beautiful the way young people are beautiful without knowing it. And she was asking me to attach my name, the last financial asset I had protected carefully since Walter died, to a lease agreement I had no control over. "Tell me about the apartment," I said. "What's the monthly rent?" she told me. I did the math in my head without letting it show on my face. Her part-time job covered roughly half of it. The rest, she said, her parents were going to help with, which meant if they stopped helping, the debt would fall to the lease. And the lease had my name on it. "Can I think about it?" I said. Her smile didn't waver, but something behind it did. "Of course," she said. "I just need to know by Sunday. They have another application on the apartment." She left, and I sat with my book open in my lap without reading a word. That night, I heard Thomas and Renee talking in the kitchen after dinner. I wasn't listening on purpose. The walls in that house carried sound the way old houses do, but I heard Renee say, "She should just do it. It's not like she's using her credit for anything." And Thomas said something quieter that I couldn't make out. Then Renee again. "She lives here for free, Thomas. The least she can do." I sat very still. For free? I thought about the Sunday dinners, the grocery runs, the 3 evenings of economics tutoring, the 10 months I had picked Cassie up from school when Renee's car was in the shop and Thomas was traveling, the way I had absorbed myself into this household and taken up as little space as possible, and how apparently that still hadn't been small enough. I got up and went to the closet, where I kept my important files in a gray accordion folder Walter had bought at an office supply store sometime in the late 90s. He was meticulous about documentation. "Eleanor," he used to say, "the paper trail is the only trail that doesn't disappear." I pulled out the folder and sat on the edge of the bed with it on my lap. I went through it slowly. Our old tax returns, the deed to the Tucson house, even though I'd signed that over when I sold it, Walter's life insurance paperwork, settled long ago, and near the back, in a manila envelope, with my name written in Walter's handwriting that's steady, slightly leftward slant, I would recognize anywhere, a set of documents I had not looked at in almost 2 years. Walter had set up a certificate of deposit in my name alone 6 months before he was diagnosed. He never told me why he did it then specifically. I think he knew, the way people sometimes know, that something is coming before the tests confirm it. The CD had matured twice since his death. I had renewed it both times without touching it, almost superstitiously, as though the money still had his hands on it. I held the envelope for a long time. I read his handwriting on the outside. Just my name. Eleanor, not Ruth. Eleanor, as if he was being formal, as if he was leaving me something official. I put the folder back and I lay down on the bed with the lights still on, and I made my decision. Sunday morning I found Cassie at the kitchen table with her laptop, and I sat down across from her with my coffee. Renee was somewhere down the hall. Thomas was outside doing something with the garden. "I thought about the apartment," I said. Cassie looked up, and the hopefulness on her face was so young it almost changed my answer. Almost. "I can't co-sign the lease," I said. "I'm sorry." The hopefulness didn't exactly disappear. It curdled into something else. "Why not?" she said, and her voice was still polite, barely. "Because if something happened and the rent wasn't paid, I would be responsible for the debt," I said. "And at my age, I can't take on a liability like that. That's not something I'm willing to risk." "Nothing's going to happen," she said. "I'm responsible." "I know you try to be," I said, "but I've seen what happens to co-signers when circumstances change. I watched it happen to your grandfather's brother years ago. It cost him his savings and 2 years of legal trouble. I won't put myself in that position." Cassie closed her laptop. "Okay," she said, in the tone that doesn't mean okay at all. Renee appeared in the kitchen doorway approximately 4 minutes later. I don't think that was a coincidence. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as managed patience. The look of someone who has decided to remain civil but wants you to know it's costing. It's worth it. Cassie told me, she said. I imagined she would. Eleanor. She said my name the way people say a word they find slightly ridiculous. You live in this house. We have never charged you rent. We have never asked you to contribute to utilities or groceries. We have given you a room and a place and 2 years of our lives. She paused. And we're asking you for one thing, one simple thing, just to put your name on a piece of paper. It's not a simple thing, I said. A co-signed lease is a legal obligation. Cassie is not going to default on her rent. You may be right, I said. But I'm not willing to stake my financial security on that certainty, and I don't think that's an unreasonable position for a woman my age. Renee set her coffee down. Fine, she said. Then I think we need to have a conversation about the living arrangements here. Because Thomas and I have been patient, and we've been accommodating, and if you're not willing to be part of this family when it actually matters, then maybe this isn't the right situation for any of us. I looked at her. Are you asking me to leave? She didn't say yes. She also didn't say no. She said, I'm saying we should think about what makes sense going forward. Then she picked up her coffee and left the kitchen. Thomas came in through the back door 20 minutes later with dirt on his gloves. He washed his hands at the sink without looking at me. I heard, he said. I expected you would. He turned around and leaned against the counter in almost exactly the same spot Renee had stood. I noticed that the way children unconsciously take on the postures of their spouses. Mom, he said, Cassie really needs this. Cassie needs to build her own credit history and find an apartment she can afford on her own income, I said. That's what she needs. What she wants is for someone else to carry the risk while she gets the reward. Those are different things. Thomas looked at the ceiling. You make it sound so cold. I'm being clear, I said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Renee thinks maybe it's time to look at other options. For your living situation, I understood that from what Renee said. It doesn't have to be hostile, he said. We could look at some senior communities nearby. Some of them are really nice, Mom. You'd have your own space, people your own age. Thomas, I said it quietly, I'd like you to stop. He stopped. I'm going to need a few weeks, I said, and I'd appreciate if we could keep this civil in the meantime. He nodded. He put his gloves on the counter and walked out of the kitchen without saying anything else. I went to my room and closed the door. I sat at the small desk Walter had helped me set up in the corner, the one we'd argued about because he thought it was too big for the space, and I thought it was exactly right. I opened my laptop. I had a name I'd written down 8 months ago, after a conversation at my former doctor's office, when a woman in the waiting room mentioned an apartment complex near the river. Independent living, she called it. Not assisted, independent. She said she'd toured it and loved the layout. I found the website. I looked at the floor plans for a long time. There was a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor, with a window that faced east. I have always loved morning light. I called the leasing office that Monday. The woman I spoke to, whose name was Patricia, was warm and unhurried. She asked about my needs and my timeline. I told her I was thinking 4 to 6 weeks. She said that was very workable. She asked if I'd like to schedule a tour. I toured it on a Wednesday, while Thomas was at work, and Renee was at her yoga class, and Cassie had gone back to campus. I drove myself in my silver Honda, which I had moved back into the garage 2 weeks earlier without asking anyone's permission, and which no one had said a word about. The apartment was on the 3rd floor as advertised. The window faced east. The kitchen was small but thoughtfully laid out, and the bedroom had a built-in bookcase along one wall that made me catch my breath a little. Walter would have loved it. He would have immediately started calculating how many of our books it could hold and whether we'd need another shelf unit. And then he would have gone to the hardware store and spent 4 hours there the way he always did, coming home with things we hadn't planned on but somehow always needed. I told Patricia I'd like to apply. She walked me through the process. Because I owned no property, I had sold the Tucson house and had no employment income. She asked about my financial history. I explained that I had my late husband's pension, my own Social Security, and savings. She asked if I could provide documentation. I told her I could provide all the documentation she required. When I got home, I went back to the gray accordion folder and I took out Walter's envelope again. I opened it this time, fully, and I spread the documents on the desk. The CD was worth more than I had let myself think about in the 2 years since I'd last looked. Walter had been more careful than I had known, more deliberate, more loving in that quiet, logistical way of his that I used to gently tease him about, and now would give almost anything to have back. At the bottom of the documents, there was a handwritten note. Not long, half a page, in that leftward slant. He must have put it in the envelope when he set everything up, before the diagnosis, before any of us knew. He wrote, "I know you'll be fine. You were always the stronger one. I just wanted to make sure you had room to prove it." I sat at the desk for a long time after that. I didn't tell Thomas and Renee I had applied for the apartment. I didn't tell Cassie. I went about the house the same as always. I made my coffee in the mornings. I stayed in my room by 8. I was polite at the dinners when all 4 of us happened to be there at the same time, which was less and less frequently. The house had gotten very efficient at avoiding itself. My application was approved on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store when Patricia called, and I sat there after we hung up and looked at the steering wheel and felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief, exactly. Something quieter than either of those. Something that felt like the first full breath I'd taken in a long time. I told Thomas that evening after dinner. Renee was in the living room. I asked Thomas if I could speak to him privately, and he followed me to the hallway with an expression that told me he'd already prepared for several versions of this conversation. I told him I had found an apartment and been approved, that I would be moving in 5 weeks, and that I hoped we could part ways without lasting damage to what was left between us. He was quiet for a moment that stretched out longer than I expected. Then he said, "Mom, we weren't trying to push you out." "I know," I said, which was partly true. "Where is it?" I told him. He knew the complex it was, maybe 12 minutes from the house. He nodded slowly. "Is it nice?" "Very," I said. "There's a bookcase built into the bedroom wall." Something moved across his face. He knew about my books. He knew about Walter and the hardware store. He looked, for just a moment, like my son again, the one who used to fall asleep on the couch with his head on my shoulder. "Dad would have liked that," he said. "I thought so too," I said. "We didn't hug. But we didn't part badly, either." I spent the next 5 weeks quietly preparing. I ordered a few things online, a small rug for the kitchen, a lamp for the bedroom, a set of curtains in a shade of blue I'd always wanted and never bought because it wasn't quite right for the Tucson house. Each package that arrived felt like an act of claiming something. A small insistence that I still got to want things. Cassie came home one weekend and found me bubble wrapping my framed photographs. She stood in the doorway of my room and watched me for a minute without speaking. "I didn't know you were actually leaving," she said. I looked up. "Where did you think I was going?" She shrugged, the way young people shrug when they mean something they won't say yet. Then she came in and sat on the edge of the bed, same as that first night, and she was quiet for a while. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "About the apartment thing." "You don't need to be sorry for asking," I said. "I know," but she stopped. "Mom said you were being difficult, but I don't think you were." I looked it up after. "What you said about cosigners. It's actually kind of scary, the liability. Your grandfather used to say, 'The paper trail is the only trail that doesn't disappear,'" I said. She smiled at that. "That sounds like something he'd say." "It does," I said. "It was. I handed her a photograph to hold while I tore off a piece of bubble wrap. It was a picture from Thomas's wedding, Walter and I dancing, my head against his shoulder, both of us laughing at something that I genuinely cannot remember now, just laughing. Whatever it was must have been worth it. Cassie held it carefully, the way young people hold things they recognize as fragile. "Grandma," she said, "will you come to my graduation? If I ever actually graduate?" "You'll graduate," I said. And yes, front row. She handed the photograph back and helped me wrap it. Moving day was a Tuesday in late spring. I had hired 2 young men from a local moving company, and they were efficient and cheerful in the way young men with physical jobs often are, joking with each other in the hallway while they carried boxes. Thomas helped without being asked. He showed up at 8 in the morning and carried boxes to the truck without making it into something, which I appreciated more than I told him. Renee stood in the driveway when I drove away. She raised her hand. I raised mine. That was enough. The apartment on the 3rd floor was smaller than Thomas and Renee's house in every measurable way. The kitchen fit exactly what I needed and nothing more. The bedroom bookcase was deeper than I'd realized from the photos, and my books filled it beautifully, and there was room left over for Walter's copy of the Field Guide to Birds of the American Southwest that I'd been keeping in a box for 2 years because there was nowhere in their house that had felt like the right place for it. I put it on the middle shelf where the morning light would hit the spine. The first night, I made myself soup from scratch, something I hadn't done in months because Renee kept a very particular kitchen, and I'd learned to work around the edges of it. I stood at my own stove and chopped celery and onion and listened to the sound of no one else's television. It was not a sad silence. It was the particular silence of a space that belongs to you, where even the quiet is yours to do with what you like. I ate at my small table by the east-facing window. The city was lit up in the blue of early evening. Somewhere below, a car passed. Somewhere further, someone was laughing. I thought about Walter. I thought about the note in his careful handwriting. "I know you'll be fine." I thought about all the years we spent making a home together, and how, somewhere in those years, I had learned the shape of myself so thoroughly that I could find it again even after he was gone. Even after I'd been reduced to a guest in my own son's house. Even after I'd been told, in the careful language of people who don't want to admit what they're saying, that my presence was conditional. I thought about the lock on the thermostat. I turned my own thermostat up to 72 and left it there. After dinner, I washed my single bowl and my single pot and set them in the drying rack and walked to the window. The bookcase caught my eye in the lamp's glow, all those spines, all those years of accumulated reading, Walter's Field Guide right in the center. I thought about Cassie and the photograph of us laughing. I thought about Thomas carrying boxes without being asked. I thought about the long road that had brought me to this particular room, this particular window, this particular night that was entirely my own. Your peace is not something you stumble into by accident. It is something you choose, sometimes at a cost, sometimes by letting go of what you thought you needed, sometimes by remembering that love does not require you to surrender yourself to prove it is real. And I had loved my daughter-in-law. I still did. In the complicated way you love people who have shown you both their best and their smallness. I had loved my granddaughter, and I loved her still. And I would be in the front row on graduation day. But this room, this light, this silence that was mine, I had not realized I was missing until I had it back. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the chair by the window and opened my book to the page I'd left off. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do. Inside, nothing was required of me. No performance of smallness, no management of someone else's discomfort with my presence. Just a woman and a book and a window. Walter had been right about that too.